Check the scope alignment.
Yes, sir. It's clear.
Good. Tighten the mount.
On it, sir.
The weight of silence, the armory smelled like gun oil and cold concrete. It always smelled that way at Fort Harlow, that particular combination of metal and discipline that soaked into the walls after years of weapons being broken down, cleaned, reassembled, and broken down again. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed at a frequency just below irritating, casting everything in flat institutional white that made shadows look sharper than they should. Rack after rack of M4s stood at attention along the east wall, grenade launchers locked behind reinforced glass, anti-material rifles in individual mounts, each one tagged, cataloged, and accounted for down to the last cleaning rod. Everything had its place. Everything had a purpose. General Wade Corbin moved through the space the way he moved through most things, deliberately unhurried, with the particular stillness of a man who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything to anyone. 4 stars on his shoulder. 32 years of service that had taken him from the mud of Fort Benning to the marble corridors of the Pentagon and back again more times than he cared to count. He had walked through armories in a dozen countries, some of them still smoking. He knew what readiness looked like. He knew what neglect looked like. And he had a gift refined over 3 decades for spotting the one thing in any room that did not quite belong. Captain Drexler trailed 2 steps behind him, tablet in hand, stylus moving across the inspection checklist in mechanical efficiency. Drexler was 26 years old, competent in the way that career track officers learn to be competent, thorough, reliable, unlikely to surprise anyone. He had the kind of face that people forgot 10 minutes after meeting him, which in the Army was sometimes the highest form of usefulness. "Inventory is clean, sir," Drexler said quietly. "No discrepancies since the last cycle." Corbin didn't respond. He was already scanning the rows, eyes moving with the slow precision of a man trained to find the crack in the armor. The armory technicians stood at their stations, shoulders square, eyes forward, breathing controlled. Good soldiers. Corbin respected that without saying so. He moved past the first row, past the second. His boots made clean, measured sounds on the concrete, each step deliberate. Then he reached the far end of the building, the heavy weapons section, and that was where he saw her. She was kneeling beside a Barrett M82A1 in the last corner of the room near the storage cages, working in the particular silence of someone who has performed the same task so many times that thought is no longer required. The Barrett was a .50 caliber anti-material rifle, 30 pounds of precision engineering that could punch through engine blocks at a mile and make armored personnel carriers deeply uncomfortable. It was not a weapon most people handled casually. She handled it like it was an extension of her hands. Each component was laid out on a clean mat in exact order. Bolt carrier group, barrel, recoil spring, buffer assembly. Her fingers moved from memory, from 10,000 repetitions, from something that had passed beyond skill into instinct. She wore standard issue ACUS, hair pulled back in a tight regulation bun. No jewelry, no expression, no acknowledgement of the inspection taking place around her. Corbin looked at her for approximately 1 second and kept walking. Just another tech doing maintenance. Nothing unusual. But something nagged at him. Not a thought, exactly the particular sensation he had learned over 32 years to pay attention to. The feeling that his eyes had registered something his conscious mind had not yet processed. Like hearing a sound that doesn't match the environment. Like watching a shadow move wrong. He stopped. Turned back. She was still kneeling now, reassembling the lower receiver with a torque wrench expression, neutral and focused. Regulation? Unremarkable. Except for the badge, it was pinned just below her unit patch on the left sleeve. Small, matte black. The kind of thing you'd miss entirely if you weren't already looking. Most people wouldn't have noticed it. Most people wouldn't have known what it meant. Corbin noticed. He stepped closer, eyes narrowing as he read the single engraved line of text on its surface. 200 meters. Confirmed. For 3 full seconds, General Wade Corbin did not breathe. He read it again. Then a third time, as though the numbers might rearrange themselves into something that made more sense. 3,200 meters. Nearly 2 miles. The longest confirmed sniper kill in modern documented military history had been made at 3,540 meters by a Canadian Special Forces operator in 2017 under near-perfect conditions with a team of experienced spotters and analysis that experts still debated years afterward. That shot was considered a once-in-a-generation event, a confluence of skill and physics and fortune that could not be manufactured or repeated on demand. And this soldier, this staff sergeant, kneeling in the corner of his armory with gun oil on her hands and absolutely no expression on her face, had a badge claiming a confirmed kill within 340 meters of that record. Soldier. His voice cut through the room like a blade through still water. The woman looked up. Her eyes were gray, very calm, and they met his with the kind of steadiness that felt deliberate, not the trained stillness of someone suppressing nerves, but the natural stillnesses of someone who genuinely had nothing to suppress. "Sir," she said, no inflection, no deference beyond the word itself. Corbin pointed at the badge. "Explain that." She glanced down at her sleeve, then back up at him. "Marksmanship Achievement Badge, sir, awarded for confirmed long-range engagement." "I know what it is," Corbin said, his voice dropping to something quieter and considerably more dangerous. "I'm asking how you have it." The room had gone completely still. Drexler's stylus was frozen above the tablet screen. Two armory technicians 3 rows over were doing an extremely poor job of pretending they couldn't hear every word. The woman set down her torque wrench with care, placing it precisely on the mat. "I earned it, sir." Corbin felt his pulse kick, not from anger, but from something rarer. Disbelief. The particular variety that comes not from skepticism, but from confronting something your experience insists should not be possible. "That distance is not in any training manual I have access to," he said. "It is not in published doctrine. It is barely in the realm of confirmed physics for a human being with a standard issue platform." She looked at him steadily. "Respectfully, sir, it's in the record." "Whose record?" "Mine." The silence that followed had weight. "Drexler, file now." Drexler's fingers moved across the tablet. A few seconds passed. Then Corbin heard the change in Drexler's breathing before he heard the words. "Sir," his voice had gone careful. "It's restricted." Corbin turned sharply. "What?" "Her service record. I can access basic identifiers, but most of it's flagged. Redacted. I'd need significantly higher clearance to go further." Corbin turned back to the soldier. "Name?" "Staff Sergeant Lena Reeves, sir." "How long have you been at Fort Harlow?" 8 months, sir." "And before that?" A pause, not long, barely a beat, but long enough. "Deployment rotation, sir. Details are classified." The air in the room shifted. Corbin stepped closer, lowering his voice to something only she could hear clearly. "I have been in this uniform longer than you have been alive. I have read files on Delta operators, DevGru shooters, and Tier 1 assets that most colonels do not know exist. Not one of them had a badge like that." Lena Reeves did not blink. "Then maybe you haven't read the right files, sir." Corbin held her gaze for 5 full seconds. Then he straightened, turned on his heel, and walked toward the exit with the measured pace of a man who had not yet decided what to do with what he had just found. "Drexler, conference room, 10 minutes." The morning air hit him like cold water outside the brief Texas window before the heat set in, when the sky was pale and the light came sideways, and everything looked more real than it would in an hour. Corbin stood on the top step and breathed deliberately. He was not a man given to unsettled feelings, but the feeling crawling up his spine right now was something he had not experienced in a long time. The feeling of having walked into a room without knowing what was in it. 10 minutes later, Corbin sat alone in conference room C with a tablet that refused to cooperate. What Drexler had pulled on Staff Sergeant Lena Reeves was almost nothing. Name, rank, MOS-11B infantryman, additional skill identifier B4 sniper, current assignment Fort Harlow, Texas, armory operations, previous assignments redacted, deployments redacted, commendations redacted. The only concrete details were biographical. Age 29, hometown Billings, Montana. Enlistment date 11 years prior. 11 years. Every single one of them walled off behind security classifications that a 4-star general could not breach with a standard tablet query. Corbin had clearances that most people at his rank didn't know existed. And here he was staring at a file that treated him like a civilian clerk who had wandered into the wrong building. "Tell me what you can see," he said. Drexler hesitated, then scrolled. "She enlisted at 18, completed basic at Fort Benning, top of her class, selected for advanced infantry training immediately, but the selection order doesn't reference the standard pipeline." He paused. "Then there's a 6-month gap, listed as in training, no location, no certifying unit, no chain of command notation." He scrolled further. "After that, she appears in a unit designation I don't recognize. Task Force Viper, no base listed, no command structure, just the name and 4 years of service. Then a secondary unit numerical designation, only no name for 5 more years. Then 8 months ago dropped into armory duty here at Fort Harlow. No transition notes, no explanation. Like someone moved a piece off the board and left it in a drawer. 11 years accounted for 6 months training, 4 years Viper, 5 years in the unnamed unit, 8 months at Fort Harlow. She would have been 22 when she left training for Viper, 26 when she transferred to the unnamed unit, 28 when she arrived here. Her qualification scores, Corbin said, listed as exempt, not failed, not passed, just exempt, as if the standard test did not apply to her. Drexler paused. When she uses the training range here, her logs show engagements at extreme distances. 800 meters, 1,200, one session at 1,600. He paused again. Every recorded shot is logged as a hit. The room was quiet. Flag it for escalation, Corbin said. Authorization request submitted within the hour. He remained at the window after Drexler left, watching the sun climb, thinking about the way Lena had looked at him. Not with fear, not with the particular anxiety soldiers displayed when a four-star general addressed them at close range, just with steadiness. The kind that came from someone who had proven themselves so thoroughly in circumstances so severe that a general's skepticism registered as background noise. He was still at the window when the secure line rang. He answered immediately. Corbin. General. The voice was familiar, controlled. Colonel Harmon Shepard, JSOC, a man Corbin had known for nearly a decade, quiet, precise, the kind of officer who looked unremarkable until you saw him work. I understand you have taken an interest in one of my former operators. Your operator. Was Shepard corrected? She's on administrative assignment at Fort Harlow now. A pause with weight in it. I think you and I need to speak privately, General. Not on this line. They met in a secure room on the second floor of the command building 40 minutes later. No recording equipment, no aids. The door locked from the inside. Shepard sat with his hands folded on the table, the posture of a man who had prepared for this conversation and decided to tell the truth. Task Force Viper was real, he said. Blacklisted unit off-book operations across 3 theaters between 2015 and 2019. Reeves came to us at 22 after completing a training program I can only describe as outside the standard architecture. Someone had identified her very early and built a custom development pipeline specifically for her. Who? Corbin asked. Shepard's expression said the answer was exactly why they were in a locked room. The program was overseen by a civilian contractor serving as a senior advisory consultant to JSOC. His name is Victor Rains. Corbin knew the name. Former long-range shooter, genuine legend in the special operations community before he transitioned out of active service and leveraged that reputation into contracting, then consulting, then a CEO position. His firm, Rains Strategic Solutions, held contracts across half the defense apparatus. He appeared at the right conferences, contributed to the right committees, shook hands in rooms where most people never got past the lobby. What about him? Corbin said. Shepard was quiet for a moment. 3 years into Viper, Reeves was assigned to a high-value interdiction in the Maghreb. Target package came through Rains. The target was designated as a senior logistics coordinator for an active threat network. He paused. Reeves set up the shot. She had the man in her scope, and then she stopped. Corbin waited. She told her spotter she had the wrong person, that the man in the scope was not the individual in the target package. She refused the shot, withdrew from position, and within 6 hours had independently identified and confirmed the actual high-value target using open-source intelligence and her own fieldcraft. Shepard's voice remained level. She made the correct shot 48 hours later. 32 hostages walked out of a facility that had held them for 9 days. And the person in the original package, Corbin said, a local municipal official, zero connection to any threat network. Someone had inserted his photograph and biographical data into the package in place of the actual target. Shepard paused. The insertion happened at the source, at the level where Rains had access. The room felt very still. You're telling me, Corbin said slowly, that someone tried to use Reeves to kill the wrong man. And when she refused, when she identified the error and corrected it herself, she was buried. Her unit designation was dissolved within 90 days of the operation. She was reassigned to a secondary unit with a numerical designation, only no name, no chain of command visibility for 5 years. Operational but invisible. Then 8 months ago, that unit was quietly stood down and she was transferred to armory operations here at Fort Harlow. No explanation, no transition briefing. Shepard met Corbin's eyes. The transfer request originated from a consulting advisory board, one of Rains' subsidiary entities. He didn't know where she was, Corbin said. He didn't, Shepard confirmed. Until tonight. A pause. The file access request that Captain Drexler submitted this evening, there is a flag embedded in her record, placed there 6 years ago. Anyone who attempts to access her file above basic identification level triggers an automated alert to a private security address. He paused. I became aware of that flag 18 months ago and chose not to remove it. I wanted to know if Rains was still watching. He is, Corbin said. The alert fired approximately 90 minutes ago. He knows someone at Fort Harlow found her. The silence that followed had weight beyond words. Corbin stood and moved to the small window, looking out at the darkening base lights coming on in barracks, vehicles completing their final runs to the motor pool, the machinery of routine grinding forward without pause. He thought about the woman in the armory. About 11 years, and a file that treated her as though she had never existed, and a badge that told a story the file refused to hold. And somewhere in Washington, D.C., a man in an expensive suit had just been informed that she had been located. "I want to talk to her tonight," Corbin said. He found her where he expected to. The armory was quieter now, down to skeleton staff lights at half power, the space feeling less institutional in the warm shadow. Lena was in her corner, same rifle, same focus. She looked up before he announced himself. She had heard him or sensed him from further away than he would have expected. "General," she said, "I spoke with Colonel Shepard." Corbin approached slowly, hands clasped behind his back. "He told me about the shot, the real one, the wrong package. What you did when you recognized the error." She set down the cleaning rod with deliberate care and looked at him. "I did what I was trained to do," she said. "Positive identification before engagement. The identification was wrong, so I didn't engage. Most soldiers under that level of pressure from that level of authority would have taken the shot." She looked at him steadily. "I know," she said. No judgment, no pride, just the flat acknowledgement of a fact she had processed long ago. "Why didn't you?" She chose her words slowly. "Because the only thing that separates what I do from murder," she said, "is certainty. About who, about why. Take that away and the distance doesn't matter. The skill doesn't matter. None of it means anything." A pause. "I was certain about what I saw in that scope, so I stopped." Corbin looked at her for a long moment. "Raines knows you're here," he said. Something changed in her eyes, not fear, something more precise than fear. "I assumed he would," she said, "once the file was queried. You knew about the flag." "I suspected. Men like that don't leave things unwatched." Corbin exhaled slowly. "I want you to understand something, Sergeant Reeves. Whatever Raines does with this information, whatever comes next, you are not on your own. Not anymore." She held his gaze for a moment. Then she returned to her rifle with the same quiet focus she brought to everything. And Corbin understood that this was not dismissal. This was how she absorbed things, through the work, through the ritual, through the discipline that had kept her intact through 11 years of circumstances that would have broken most people. He left her there in her corner under the half-lit fluorescence and stood outside the armory doors in the Texas night, understanding something he hadn't fully understood before. He had thought walking into the inspection that morning that he was checking inventory, the routine work of command. He understood now that he had found something. Not a soldier hiding in plain sight. Something more fundamental. A person who had been told in the most unambiguous way possible that their judgment could not be trusted, and who had spent 6 years proving in silence that it could. The question now was what the man who had buried her was going to do about it. He got his answer the following morning. Corbin was reviewing supply requisitions when Drexler appeared in his doorway with the expression of someone delivering information they weren't certain how to frame. Behind him was a man Corbin recognized immediately. Victor Raines was 50 years old and looked the way former operators sometimes looked when they transitioned into money. The physicality still there, shaped now by conference rooms rather than field conditions. The edges smoothed without being entirely gone. Dark suit, practiced handshake, the voice of someone accustomed to being believed. He expressed measured surprise at finding Lena Reeves in armory operations, called her a remarkable talent, characterized her removal from active assignment as a mutual decision reached in the interest of operational security. He spoke of her with the proprietorial warmth of someone describing a tool they had built and retained the right to manage. He said nothing about the flag in her file, nothing about the wrong target package, nothing about 6 years of engineered invisibility. What he did say near the end of 47 minutes was this: "I'd recommend against pulling her file any further, General. The classifications exist for good reasons. Some histories are better left documented at the level they're currently documented at." He smiled, "For everyone's benefit." Corbin looked at him steadily. "I appreciate the guidance, Mr. Raines." Raines left. The threat delivered so smoothly it could be dismissed as advice settled into the room like smoke after a fire. Corbin picked up the secure line and called Shepard. "He came in person," Corbin said, "and he wants me to stop looking." "I know," Shepard said, "which means we keep looking." "Yes," Corbin said, "we do." The congressional delegation arrived 4 days after Raines's visit, carrying with it the particular momentum that political visits always generated: a wave of advanced logistics, security sweeps, and the general disruption that important people tended to produce in the spaces they moved through. Senator Langford led the group. He was the chairman of the Armed Services Committee, tall, silver-haired, possessed of the precise confidence of a man who had never been in combat, but had spent 30 years making decisions about people who had. His interest in budget justifications carried the force of institutional gravity. He wanted a demonstration. The message came through official channels phrased as a request, which meant it was not a request. He had read a classified briefing which told Corbin the briefing had not been properly contained, and he wanted to see precision capability in practice. He had been specific about the asset he wanted to see. Corbin found Lena in the armory that evening. Tomorrow, 1400 hours, extended range facility. She absorbed the news without visible reaction. How much do they know? Enough to be dangerous about it, Corbin said. The night before the demonstration, someone went into the range equipment storage and made a very small adjustment. It required both access and knowledge. The scope on the Barrett assigned to Lena was a Night Force Car, a precision optic whose tolerances were measured in fractions of a degree. Someone adjusted it by 0.3 degrees, invisible to the naked eye. At standard distances, the deviation produced a miss of inches, annoying, explainable, attributable to conditions or variance. At 4,000 meters, the same deviation produced a miss of several feet. Not a technical failure, not bad luck. A very public, very visible proof that the woman with the impossible badge could not perform when it mattered. Lena noticed it at 5:30 the next morning. She arrived 2 hours before anyone else, as she always did, before anything that mattered, and worked through her preparation with unhurried precision. Rifle assembly, ammunition selection, environmental assessment, then scope checks. She stopped. She lay there for almost a full minute without moving. The deviation was small. She worked through the mathematics in her head, recalculating every holdover, incorporating the 0.3 degree offset as a fixed constant, rather than trying to correct the optic itself, making the deviation part of her firing solution rather than an obstacle to it. It took 40 minutes and required rebuilding her entire approach to the shot from the ground up. She said nothing to anyone. Instead, she watched. When the VIP platform filled at 1340 with senators and contractors and journalists, she was already prone at the firing line. Lieutenant Avery settled beside her as her assigned forward observer, 24 years old from Wisconsin, never downrange for anything that had actually mattered. He had spent considerable effort concealing how much this opportunity meant to him. Wind holding northwest at 7, he said quietly. Pressure stable. Mirage is light. The range officer, Master Sergeant Fowler, stepped to the microphone. Sergeant Reeves is cleared for demonstration fire. Targets at 800, 1200, and 2000 meters. Lena took the 800-meter shot in the natural pause between two gusts. The rifle's report cracked across the range. Steel rang a half-second later. Polite applause from the platform. She worked the bolt with the economy of someone for whom the action had long since become unconscious. The 1,200-meter shot required 4 minutes of waiting a specific window when the wind steadied and the math aligned. The VIPs grew restless. She let them. She fired. The target rang, more applause. Then Senator Langford's voice came across the platform with the confidence of a man accustomed to setting the terms of any conversation he occupied. Sergeant Reeves, I understand your record includes a confirmed engagement at over 3,000 meters. What we'd really like to see is something closer to that, something that justifies the investment we're being asked to authorize. A pause. Push it out as far as the range allows. 4,000 say. Can she do it? Corbin's voice came immediately. Senator, the facility's extended range does not accommodate. Then put a target there. Use a vehicle, a barrel, anything. Langford's tone remained pleasant. I want to see if the reports are accurate before we allocate accordingly. Lena lay still at the firing line. She did not turn around. She thought about the scope adjustment she had found that morning. Someone had tried to build this moment into her failure, carefully prepared the mechanism so that when the most influential people in defense appropriations watched her perform, they would see something less than what she was. She was not going to give them that. 4,000 meters, she said clearly. Set the target. It took 90 minutes. A maintenance crew positioned a decommissioned Humvee at the 4,000-meter mark, painted a 2-foot orange square on the driver's door in bright paint visible through optics. At that distance, then retreated. The vehicle sat alone in the desert heat, impossibly far away, a toy from here, a test from everywhere. Avery ran his instruments. Range confirmed at 4,112 meters. Wind variable west-northwest 8 to 14 knots. Temperature 91 and rising. Heat distortion is significant. Lena had already rebuilt her firing solution 3 times, once for original conditions, once incorporating the scope deviation as a constant, once for the current environmental data. The bullet would drop over 80 feet, flight time approaching 6 seconds. The Earth's rotation demanded a compensation that lived below the level of conscious calculation and had to be trusted to the body rather than worked out in the moment. She found the window 14 minutes into the wait, not a break in the wind, but a moment of relative consistency, gusts evening to the steady 9 knots, the mirage settling from erratic shimmer to something predictable, the target sitting still in her scope. She fired. The sound rolled across the range and came back off the distant hills, reduced to an echo of itself. Avery counted. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5.5. The radio from the ground observers crackled. Impact confirmed. Hit on the painted square. The VIP platform produced no sound at all for 3 full seconds. Then it erupted. Lena lay in position for the required follow-through, not from drama, but from discipline. Then she safed the rifle, stood, and began her post-engagement sequence. She was scanning the perimeter staff when she saw him. A logistics technician standing near the equipment shed 30 meters from the firing line. Civilian contractor badge, early 30s. He had been there since before the VIPs arrived. She had clocked him during her initial survey and filed him as administrative support. Now she looked at him directly. Everyone within visible range had reacted with some version of involuntary surprise, the lean forward, the expression of someone processing something their expectations had not prepared them for. Natural. Universal. This man's face had not changed, not relief, not surprise. The careful neutral of someone who had expected a different outcome and had not yet decided how to respond to the wrong one. Lena held his face in her memory for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned to Avery. "The contractor at the equipment shed," she said quietly, eyes forward. "Dark vest, civilian badge." Avery kept his gaze on the platform. "I see him. I need a name by tonight." Avery had it by 2,000 hours. The man's name was Gerald Pratt, contracted through a facilities management company that shared a registered agent with a subsidiary of Rain's Strategic Solutions. He had been on site at Fort Harlow for 11 days, arriving 4 days before Rain's visit. Lena passed this to Avery with one instruction. "Document it, physical only, nothing networked." "There's more," Avery said. He pulled out a folded piece of paper handwritten from memory, the careful notation of someone with an accounting degree and the instinct to follow money rather than people. "The facilities management company shares board members with 2 other entities. I've been tracing the ownership structure since the demo was announced." He paused. "I haven't finished yet." "Keep going," she said, carefully. The embassy mission came 6 days after the demonstration. It arrived through Major Quinn at 0216 American and Allied personnel held in a fortified compound, a 14-second window each morning when the senior commander crossed between buildings. Conventional assault estimated to produce unacceptable casualties. Range 2,800 meters. Variable wind, urban thermal layers, a human target in motion. Avery was assigned as her spotter. He met her at the transport with his equipment staged and his face carrying the controlled expression of someone who had decided to meet what was being asked of them rather than retreat from it. He was 24 years old. He had never done anything like this. "Tell me what you're thinking," she said as the aircraft leveled out over the Atlantic. He considered the question as though it surprised him. Then, "I'm thinking that if I give you bad data, 16 people die and I spend the rest of my life knowing I was the reason." She looked at him steadily. "That is exactly the right thing to be thinking." They inserted before dawn and moved to a ridgeline position overlooking the valley where the embassy sat behind walls and floodlights. Avery gave her wind readings every 4 minutes. He confirmed the range at 2,820 meters. He tracked temperature and pressure as the sky moved through its spectrum from black to deep blue to the pale gray of early morning. At 6:27, the door of the main building opened. The figure who stepped through was tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the unhurried confidence of someone who believed absolutely in his own safety. He stopped briefly in the courtyard, said something to a guard, and began walking. Avery's voice came barely above a whisper. "Confirmed, that's the target." Lena had been calculating the shot for 4 hours. Every variable measured, every constant accounted for. The bullet would drop nearly 30 feet. The crosswind would push it left. The thermal layer above the compound walls would create a brief deviation she had to anticipate rather than respond to. She exhaled halfway. The target walked. She fired. 7 seconds of absolute silence. Then Avery drew a sharp breath. "Hit. Confirmed hit. Target is down." The compound erupted in the particular chaos that follows the loss of a command structure, not organized resistance, but the frantic movement of people whose orders had just ceased to exist. Avery was on the radio immediately, his voice steady in a way that told Lena he had found something in himself during those 7 seconds that he had not been certain was there. The QRF moved. 16 people walked out. On the flight back, Avery sat in the cargo bay and stared at the floor for a long time. Lena let him. Some things needed the silence to settle before they could be examined. Eventually he said, "How do you carry it?" "You don't put it down," she said. "You carry it, but carrying something and being crushed by it are different things. The difference is understanding why the weight is there." He thought about that for a long time. The debrief 3 days later was supposed to be routine. It was not. After this formal session closed, Avery stayed alone in the briefing room with the intelligence feeds still open on the wall display. He had noticed something during the planning phase that he had set aside under the pressure of preparation, a detail that had stayed in the back of his mind, the way small inconsistencies stayed in the minds of people too thorough to ignore them. The militant group had known the schedule. Not generally, not approximately. They had known the exact rotation of embassy personnel, the specific time windows when staff moved between secure and unsecured areas, the interior layout that allowed them to position hostages in locations that maximized the difficulty of any conventional rescue. That level of operational detail did not come from surveillance alone. It came from access. Avery worked for 6 hours. The money moved through 4 layers of incorporation, 2 domestic LLCs, a Nevada trust, a Delaware holding company. The underlying ownership structure connected to the same registered agent that Gerald Pratt's facilities management company used. The same network he had already been tracing since the scope sabotage. It was not the same entry point, but it was the same architecture. Rain's strategic solutions was not just watching Lena. It had been an active participant in the conditions that required her. Avery printed nothing, saved nothing to any network drive, memorized what he had found and added it to the physical file he had been building in handwritten notation since Fort Harlow. He went to Lena that night. She listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "You told no one else," she said. "No. Keep it that way. Add this to the file." She paused. "And Avery, be careful what you do next. Whoever embedded that flag in my record is watching channels we haven't fully mapped." He nodded. He understood. Not fully, not yet. Lena joined Task Force Wraith 6 weeks later. The conversation with Shepard and Corbin lasted less than 30 minutes. 3 conditions delivered flatly and without apology. Mission acceptance authority retained by herself based on tactical assessment. No public demonstrations or media access of any kind, rank and pay grade, held static regardless of political considerations. Shepard accepted without counteroffer. Corbin signed. Task Force Wraith operated from a facility at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, that appeared on base maps as an administrative annex. Master Sergeant Briggs commanded the unit, 43 years old, built like someone who had been taking up space in the world through sheer physical presence for most of his life, possessed of an authority that required no announcement. He assessed Lena at their first meeting with a directness she found clarifying rather than hostile. "We work on demonstrated performance," he said. "You prove you can operate within the team. The team proves it can work around you. After 60 days, we figure out what we actually have." "Agreed," she said. Sergeant Wren was the team's tactical coordinator, the other woman lean and hard-eyed and possessed of the specific quality of someone who had been underestimated enough times to have made it a professional advantage. She came to find Lena on her second night at Bragg with 2 cups of coffee and the posture of someone who had decided to be direct. "The guys are skeptical," Wren said, handing her a cup. "Not hostile, just a classified file isn't the same as watching someone work. So give them something real, not for their benefit, for the mission. Because if they don't trust your read on a shot, they'll hesitate on your signal, and hesitation is the thing that gets people killed." She paused. "We lost a shooter in Yemen before you got here. Good operator. He tried to take a shot he wasn't honest about. He knew the angle was wrong. He just didn't say so." "I'll say so," Lena Reeves said. Wren looked at her for a moment. "Good. Then we'll be fine." The walk-in corridor mission came 8 weeks into Lena's integration. A logistics coordinator for a weapons distribution network. A compound carved into a mountainside at 9,000 feet in Afghanistan, the firing position 412 meters below the target's known movement pattern. 3,100 meters across a valley with downdraft thermals and atmospheric density changes that required real-time adjustment throughout. They inserted at night, moving through terrain that punished every kilogram of equipment carried. Lena spent 4 hours in position before dawn, building the shot through repeated calculation, measuring wind every 6 minutes, learning the rhythm of the thermal shifts, identifying the intervals when the mountain air steadied enough to trust. At 0612, the target emerged from the main building. She fired. The round traveled 3,100 meters through mountain air and struck its target center mass. Briggs, lying beside her with his own optic, let out a single controlled breath. Good, he said, nothing more. She was already securing her equipment. The anonymous message arrived 48 hours after they returned from Wakan. It came through a private communication protocol call that Wraith used for sensitive internal coordination, a channel that should not have been accessible to anyone outside the unit. No sender identification, no routing information that any technical knowledge she possessed could trace. A single line of text: 3 of your last 5 targets were manufactured. The man who trained you built the list. Lena read it twice, then she sat very still for a long time. The man who trained you. Victor Rains had not simply overseen the program that developed her. He had been present in it personally for the first 18 months. He had designed the targeting methodology that Task Force Viper used to identify and confirm high-value interdiction subjects. He had sat across tables from her in windowless rooms and explained the philosophy of precision, the ethics of the shot, the obligation of certainty, the responsibility that came with the capability she was building. He had taught her what justified pulling the trigger, and he had spent the following years constructing systems of false certainty around her carefully formatted packages that looked correct because they were built by someone who knew what correct looked like from the inside, confirmed by a shooter whose verification process was so rigorous that no one questioned the results. She confirmed what she was shown. She was shown what Rains built. She did not allow herself to feel the full weight of that yet. Not in this moment. The feeling would come in the quiet in the hours before sleep. Right now, she needed to think. She pulled out Avery's physical file, printed pages, handwritten annotations in his careful hand, the financial connections laid out in the logic of someone who followed money rather than people. She looked at it for a long time. Then she went to find Briggs. He was in the equipment room running maintenance on his sidearm. He looked up when she entered, read her expression in a heartbeat, and set down the weapon. She told him everything. The wrong package from 6 years ago, Rains' visit to Fort Harlow, the scope sabotage in Gerald Pratt, Avery's financial trail connecting the embassy leak to Rains' network, the anonymous message. Briggs listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for 30 full seconds. How much does Avery know, he asked. The financial connections, Pratt, the embassy leak, not the full target history. And the message, nobody but you. He nodded, organizing information into a structure that would hold. Whoever sent that message had access to Wraith's internal protocol. They're either inside the system or they were. I know. Do you trust Avery? He printed the evidence, memorized it, and came to me first, she said. Yes. Then we keep him close. Whatever he's still pulling, he stops doing it alone. Briggs paused. There's one more thing we need to address. She already knew what he was going to say. The targets I was given, she said, the ones I confirmed through the standard process. I need to know if they were real. That's going to take time and access I'll need to obtain through channels I don't normally use. I know. And if the answer is what you're afraid it is, then I need to know that most of all, she said. Her voice was steady. Everything about her was steady. But Briggs had been reading people under operational pressure for 20 years, and he heard underneath the steadiness something that occupied the same territory as fear, without being fear, exactly. The particular quality of someone who knows what they might be about to learn about themselves. All right, he said quietly. We'll find out. That evening, Avery's channel sent 3 words. Going dark. Following up. She was on a line to Briggs within 90 seconds. He's gone to D.C., she said. He found something in those records I didn't see or something he didn't tell me, and he went after it alone. 6 hours on the timestamp, Briggs said. Yes. The line was quiet for a moment. Rains knows where this base is, Briggs said carefully. He knows where you are, and he's been watching channels we haven't fully mapped. She didn't answer. There was nothing to add. I'll start making calls, Briggs said. Nothing through standard channels, nothing that creates a record. He paused. Lena, don't move without me. She was in her quarters with her go-bag beside the door. I hear you, she said. She did not open the bag, but she did not move it far from her hands. They drove through the night without headlights for the last 11 miles. Briggs had sourced the vehicles through channels he described only as personal. Nothing connected to Fort Bragg's motor pool. or any requisition form that could be traced or flagged. He had prepared for this kind of contingency the way experienced operators prepared for most things quietly in advance, on the understanding that the moment you needed a contingency was never the moment you had time to build one. They had 4 hours before anyone at Bragg would notice they were gone. Lena sat in the passenger seat watching the Virginia countryside move past in shades of gray and black. The warehousing district south of Fairfax County resolved out of the darkness, low industrial buildings, chain-link perimeters, sodium lights at irregular intervals. The kind of place where something could happen and take time to be noticed. Briggs had spent 4 hours working the phone with the ferocity of a man calling in favors carefully accumulated over years. 3 names former operators who had worked alongside Raines's contracted entities and come away with the professional wariness of people who recognized when something wasn't right. Cross-referencing those names against Avery's financial documents and the geographic footprint of Raines Strategic Solutions produced a short list of 3 facilities within driving distance of Washington that were owned through subsidiary entities and had no obvious operational purpose. The warehouse at the end of the access road was the second one they checked. 2 exterior guards, positioned with the competence of private security, rather than trained military watching the approaches, not the angles, not accounting for the possibility that someone might come in low and slow from a direction that required lying in wet grass for 8 minutes. Briggs handled both guards efficiently and without apparent effort, in the way of someone for whom close quarters work had long ago become simply a task to be completed. Inside the warehouse was divided by temporary partitioning into spaces that had the functional quality of improvisation, staged for a purpose not designed around one. Lena cleared the first 2 rooms. The third held Avery. He was secured to a chair alert, a cut above his left eyebrow dried to a thin, dark line. His expression cycled through several things when the door opened before settling on something attempting calm. "I found something else," he said before either of them spoke. "Tell me on the road," Lena said. Briggs worked the restraints in 30 seconds. Then they moved. Avery talked for the entire 2-hour drive back. He had gone to Washington because one thread in the financial documentation led somewhere he couldn't follow from a network computer without generating records he didn't want to generate. A name, a former JSOC program coordinator who had worked inside the targeting pipeline alongside Raines during the years when Lena was operational with Task Force Viper. The coordinator had left government service 6 years ago and was living in Arlington. Avery found him in person. The coordinator had talked, not easily, but he had talked. What he described was not a series of opportunistic decisions made in the moment, but a deliberate system built over more than 8 years. Raines had identified early in his transition from active service that the most valuable asset he possessed was not his reputation or his relationships, but his intimate understanding of the targeting process, specifically how a properly formatted intelligence package moved through the confirmation pipeline without triggering the scrutiny that packages with obvious inconsistencies attracted. He had built a capability around that understanding. Targets were inserted into legitimate intelligence flows by exploiting the procedural gaps between collection analysis and authorization. The packages looked correct because they were built by someone who knew what correct looked like from the inside. And the shooter at the end of the pipeline had been specifically selected and developed for her inability to be doubted. Lena's confirmation process was rigorous. Her shot discipline was absolute. Her refusal rate was essentially 0 once a target cleared her own independent verification. That verification process, the thing she trusted most, the foundation of her entire professional identity, had not been compromised from the outside. It had been corrupted at its source by the man who taught her what certainty was supposed to look like. She confirmed what she was shown. She was shown what Raines built. 2 of the last 5 operational targets had been legitimate. 3 had been competitors in the defense contracting space or witnesses to transactions that would have produced criminal liability or obstacles to acquisitions that added hundreds of millions to the value of Raines's enterprise. When Avery finished, the vehicle was very quiet for a long time. Briggs drove with both hands on the wheel and said nothing. Lena sat with her hands folded in her lap and felt something happen inside her that she could not have named. It was not grief exactly, not rage. Something more structural, the sensation of a load-bearing element being removed from a building that had organized itself around its presence for years. She had built her entire understanding of what she was, what her capability meant, what justified the weight of carrying it on the foundation of certainty. The certainty of her identification, the certainty of her judgment, the certainty that when she pulled the trigger, the person in her scope was exactly who the intelligence said they were and exactly why the mission said they mattered. That foundation had not been attacked from outside. It had been built on poisoned ground by the man who taught her what certainty was supposed to look like. She sat with that understanding and did not move away from it. She let it be exactly as heavy as it was. Avery, she said finally. Yes. The coordinator in Arlington, he was the one who sent the anonymous message. A pause. I think so. He said he'd been trying to reach someone for 3 years. He didn't know who to trust. Did you tell him what you were building? Enough. He gave me 2 more names, both willing to provide accounts. Avery paused. Lena, those 3 targets, the manufactured ones. Do you want to know who they were? The vehicle moved through the darkness. Yes, she said. I need to know all of it, he told her. She listened to each name and the circumstances surrounding it and what those circumstances had enabled and prevented and cost. She listened without expression, without flinching, without the armor of professional detachment that she had spent years building precisely for moments that required it. She let each name land at its full weight. When he finished, she said, "Thank you for telling me." He understood that she did not mean it as courtesy. They arrived at a location Briggs had arranged, a private property in rural North Carolina, belonging to a former teammate who asked no questions and provided a secure room and a non-networked computer. They spent the next 14 hours documenting everything. Avery organized the financial evidence with methodical thoroughness. Briggs built a picture of Raines's physical security footprint, the McLean estate, the Rosslyn office, the contracted facilities that told him the man was running protection far beyond standard executive security. He was afraid of something, or he was preparing for something. On the second morning, Lena called Corbin on the secure line Shepard had established. She was brief. Essential framework. Documentation confirmed. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Come in. Bring everything." The meeting happened in a facility Corbin had chosen for its absence from any digital scheduling system. No recording equipment, no aides. Corbin, Shepard, Briggs, Avery, Lena. Avery spent 90 minutes presenting the documentation. When he finished, Corbin sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at the organized collection of evidence with the expression of a man who has spent 32 years in an institution and is in the process of understanding that the institution has been carrying something contaminated inside it for longer than he knew. He did not speak for 3 minutes. "Then I need to make 3 calls. After I make them, there is no more discretion available to anyone in this room about how this proceeds. So I want to be certain before I make them. Is this complete? Is there anything in this record that doesn't hold?" "The financial connections are complete," Avery said. "The targeting correlation is complete. The Arlington coordinator's account is testimonial, but I have 2 additional witnesses who can corroborate the targeting methodology independently. I can verify it from my end," Shepard said. Everyone in the room looked at him. "I've had suspicions about specific packages for 3 years. I wasn't certain enough of my own access security to start asking questions out loud." He paused. "I can cross-reference the target packages against the independent intelligence record. 24 hours. "Do it," Corbin said. 27 hours later, Shepard returned. 4 packages, he said in the flat tone of someone who has confirmed something they hoped would not be confirmed. Not 3. One of them predates anything in Avery's financial record by 2 years. The room absorbed this without sound. Lena did not move. She had already counted the weight of 3 names on the drive from North Carolina. Now she added a 4th earlier before Avery's file even began. She did not look away from the number. She did not try to make it smaller. 4. 4 people whose names she now knew, whose deaths she had delivered, believing she was doing something that mattered, while the man who taught her what mattered had been running his own ledger with her as the instrument. Corbin stood and looked at her directly. He did not offer comfort. He understood that comfort was not what this moment required. "I'm making the calls," he said. Before he left the room, he crossed to where she sat and placed a small leather case on the table in front of her, worn at the corners, dark with age. She opened it, a Distinguished Service Cross on a faded ribbon. The metal had the slight tarnish of something too important for a shelf but too personal for official display. "Mine," Corbin said, "from 2003. I made a call that was right for the people standing behind me and wrong according to 6 regulatory frameworks that existed for good reasons. I received the medal and a formal reprimand in the same week." He paused. "I'm not giving you this for what you've done. I'm giving it to you because of what you understood when everything was pulling you toward a different decision. You stopped. You were certain about what you saw, and so you stopped. Everything we're doing in this room right now begins with that moment." He paused again. "The weight you're carrying right now, the 4 names, that weight belongs to the man who built the system. Not to the instrument he deceived, But I won't tell you to set it down. I'll tell you what I've learned carrying mine for 20 years. The weight doesn't diminish. But if you understand exactly where it comes from, it becomes something you can work with, something that keeps you honest. And you need to stay honest, Sergeant Reeves. What you can do is too dangerous for anything less. Lena closed the case. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The arrest of Victor Raines happened 11 days later, in the pre-dawn hours at his residence in McLean, Virginia. A joint federal team operating under a warrant assembled with the speed of people who had been waiting for exactly this kind of documentation. No press release, no public court date. The particular darkness between official record and operational reality. According to the agent who briefed Corbin afterward, Raines looked at the warrant, then at the team, then at nothing in particular for the rest of the process. Not surprised, only recalibrating which specific mechanism had finally reached him. His company's contracts were suspended, his clearances revoked. Gerald Pratt was taken into federal custody 6 days later at a facility in Richmond, his connection to the scope sabotage, and the Fort Harlow access providing the domestic criminal thread that anchored everything else. The process that followed would be slow and largely invisible, conducted through channels that did not hold press conferences. But it would be thorough. 2 weeks after Raines' arrest, the mission came. Major Quinn delivered the operational summary at 0400 in a Fort Bragg briefing room. An investigative journalist American seized 3 days earlier by an armed faction operating in the Chihuahuan Desert region of New Mexico, near the border corridor, where cartel infrastructure and extremist logistics overlapped in ways that made attribution complicated. The faction had announced their intention to execute her publicly. The deadline was 31 hours from the start of the briefing. Rescue team options evaluated and rejected. Open desert terrain, any conventional ground approach would be detected at sufficient distance to allow execution before engagement. Air options constrained by political considerations around the border region. The faction had one identifiable leader whose removal would produce sufficient operational chaos for a ground team positioned at closer range to move in during the confusion window. Range to the identified firing position 4,200 meters. Briggs looked at Lena across the table. "I'll need 12 hours to set up," she said. "You have 14. They inserted at 0200 under full darkness. The ground team positioned at an intermediate point 3 kilometers from the compound, close enough for an assault during the window, but beyond conventional engagement range. Lena and Wren moved to the firing position together, a shallow ridge of compressed earth and stone, offering minimal concealment, but the necessary shot geometry. Wren set up her instruments with practiced speed. West-southwest wind, 11 knots gusting to 16. Temperature 68 degrees and falling. Barometric pressure stable. The desert at this hour had an absolute quality of flatness, sound traveling in unexpected ways, stars with no competition from artificial light for miles in any direction. Lena assembled her rifle in the dark from 12 years of repetition. She ran the ballistic calculation in her head, then confirmed it on her field computer. 4,230 meters to the compound's central position. Bullet drop 104 feet. Flight time 8 seconds. Wind drift at the gusting end requiring a hold substantially to the right of the visible target. The mirage would be minimal before full sunrise, one of the few advantages the timing afforded. She settled into position and began to wait. Wren gave her readings every 8 minutes, no editorializing, just data cleanly packaged, delivered without inflection. They had been in position for 2 hours when Wren's voice changed. Not dramatically, not in a way audible to anyone who hadn't spent a year learning the specific frequencies of that voice under operational conditions. But Lena heard it. "I have something," Wren said, perfectly controlled. 3 degrees left, bearing 240, approximately 800 meters. Give me 30 seconds. Lena did not move, did not shift her visible profile by any amount detectable by someone watching the ridge. 30 seconds. "It's a hide," Wren said, "netting and natural brush. Prone firing position. I missed it on the initial sweep." A pause of 2 seconds. "He has a line of sight on your position." The desert was very still. Lena understood in the span of a single breath the complete architecture of what she was looking at. Raines was in custody, his contracts were suspended. But systems do not cease functioning because their architect has been removed. The journalist's kidnapping was real. The faction was real. Every variable she had spent 2 hours calculating was accurate. But the firing position, she had been guided to the specific ridge, the specific elevation, the geometry of the shot had been designed to place her exactly here, in the precise location where a second shooter at 800 meters with a clean angle could wait for her muzzle blast as a confirmation signal. One shot from Lena. One shot from the position 800 meters to her left. The last managed action of a network that had been running for 8 years triggered from a holding facility in McLean by a man who had decided if he was going down, that she was going with him. She breathed. "Can you take him?" she asked. Ren's answer was immediate. "Yes." Without him knowing he's been acquired. "I need 4 minutes." 4 minutes. The compound below was showing the first signs of dawn activity lights inside the vehicle's figures moving between structures. The faction leader would be visible within approximately 20 minutes based on the behavioral pattern documented over 72 hours. The ground team was in position. The window was real and finite. "Take the 4 minutes," Lena said. She stayed absolutely still. She ran the shot again in her head, not because the calculation had changed, but because recalculation was discipline, and discipline was the only thing she had ever been able to fully trust. 4,230 meters, 8 seconds of flight time. The wind had steadied in the last 40 minutes to a consistent 12 knots of favorable development noted and incorporated. She thought about 4 names. She thought about what Corbin had said. The weight doesn't diminish, but if you understand exactly where it comes from, it becomes something you can work with. She thought about the journalist in the compound below. She did not know her name. She did not need to. There was a person down there who had been taken by force and was going to be killed on a deadline, and the only variable between that outcome and a different one was a calculation that Lena had made and remade until it was as certain as anything in the physical world could be. She thought about the first time she had stopped. She was not stopping now. 4 minutes passed with precision. Ren said, "Ready." "On my shot," Lena said. The faction leader emerged at 0614, moving from the primary vehicle toward the communications equipment staged at the compound center. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had not yet understood the shape of the morning. Lena exhaled halfway, found the stillness beneath the stillness, pulled the trigger. The rifle thundered against her shoulder. She held position through the follow-through, watching through the scope as 8 seconds of flight time stretched across the desert like something suspended between one world and another. She heard Ren's rifle fire half a second behind her own 800 meters to the left, quieter, smaller caliber, unmistakably what it was. The faction leader dropped at 4,200 meters. The hired operator 800 meters to her left did not fire a second shot. The ground team moved at 6 seconds after Lena's shot before the compound fully processed what had happened. 11 minutes later, the radio confirmed hostage secure. 11 minutes after that, the journalist was in a vehicle and moving. Lena lowered her rifle. She breathed all the way out for the first time since they had inserted. Ren appeared beside her, moving from her secondary position with the quiet professionalism that had defined her over 12 months of working together. She looked at Lena for a moment without speaking. "Thank you," Lena said. Ren shook her head slightly. "That's what the team is for," she said. "That's always what the team is for." They began breaking down their positions. The formal end came 3 weeks later, not with drama, with a series of small administrative actions that accumulated over several days into a new reality. Clearance reviews, personnel order modifications, a meeting in Shepard's office covering the practical logistics of transition out of active assignment. Corbin flew to Bragg specifically to deliver one document in person. He sat across from her in a small office plane room, 2 chairs, a window looking onto the training ranges where recruits ran drills in the early morning. He set a single page on the table between them. She picked it up. An accommodation recommendation, Silver Star citation covering the New Mexico operation in formally accurate but appropriately broad language. Below it, a citation for the embassy operation. Below that, a commendation covering the full Wraith operational record in the official language reserved for things that cannot be publicly named. She set it back on the table. "I know you don't want them," Corbin said. "It's not about wanting, it's about what they represent." She paused. "A version of events clean enough to write down and hand to someone." "What actually happened isn't clean," he agreed, "but the accommodations aren't for the narrative. They're for the record. And the record matters not for you, but for the next person who sits in a room with a general who doesn't know what they're looking at." He paused. "The record is what makes the next conversation shorter than ours was, and possibly saves the next Lena Reeves from 6 years in an armory." She looked at him. He had aged in the 11 months since she had first seen him in the armory, not visibly, not in a way anyone paying casual attention would register, but in the way that specific kinds of weight aged a person. The weight of knowing what the institution he had served for 32 years was capable of at its best and at its worst, and having to hold both simultaneously without collapsing the distinction between them. She respected that. She had not expected to. What happens to you, she asked. 14 months before mandatory retirement review. I intend to use them. He paused. There are structural changes needed in how intelligence packages are validated at the targeting level. Changes that require someone with enough institutional standing to push through the resistance from people who benefit from the existing gaps. Someone has to do it from the inside, so I will. She nodded. And Avery. Joint Intelligence Analysis Unit. The work suits him. He's accepted. Corbin's expression shifted slightly. He asked me to tell you something if I saw you before you left. What? He said I finally understand the difference between the shot and the moment. She taught me that. Lena was quiet for a long moment. Then she picked up the accommodation page, folded it with care, and put it in her jacket pocket. Thank you, she said. For the record. She was on a flight to Montana that afternoon. The drive from the airport took 2 hours on a 2-lane road through country that opened gradually from the flatlands near the highway into the Bitterroot Valley Mountains, rising on both sides until the sky became a narrower thing, defined by ridgelines rather than horizon. The kind of country that required patience rather than speed. The kind that did not accommodate pretending you were anywhere other than exactly where you were. She had bought the land 2 years before any of this happened. 40 acres of mixed forest and open meadow on the east slope of a ridge, with a view that on clear days extended further than she could practically measure. A single-story house and a workshop, both modest, both built to last. The first week she spent repairing what a period of vacancy had loosened the kind of small work that a structure needs after time alone. She worked with her hands and did not think deliberately about the things she had done or the things done around her. She let the 4 names exist in her mind as facts rather than wounds. She did not try to make them smaller than they were, and she did not try to make them larger. She thought about those things at night in the particular silence of a place far enough from everything that darkness was an actual physical quality rather than the temporary absence of noise. She let each thought move at its natural pace. She did not rush anything toward resolution. By the 3rd week, she was sleeping. By the 2nd month, she had set up a workbench in the workshop and was building a precision rifle from components, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to understand the mechanics at a level that operational work had never afforded time for. She discovered that building something from its component parts had a quality that using something already built did not. A clarity about what each element contributed, why each tolerance mattered. How the whole became more than its parts through the accumulation of small decisions made carefully, honestly, without shortcuts. In the spring, a young man arrived from Wyoming, a competitive long-range shooter, 22 years old, who had found her name through channels she had not known still led anywhere. He asked with the specific combination of humility and determination that she recognized as the quality of someone very good who understood they had further to go if she would work with him. She said yes. She taught him ballistics, atmospherics, mechanical discipline. She also taught him what Corbin had given her without intending to, the understanding that the shot existed inside a context larger than the shot itself, that certainty was not just a technical condition, but a moral one, that the distance you could reach was only meaningful in proportion to the clarity of the purpose that sent you there. He was serious. That mattered more than anything else. In the fall, Wren came to visit for a week. They spent 3 days on the ridge above the house, working at distances that no certification required, and that existed only as a conversation between 2 people who had found a common language in a field most people spent their lives never knowing was there. On the last evening, sitting on the porch with the mountains going dark in layers of purple and gray above the valley, Wren said, "Briggs says the unit is different without you. Not worse. Different." Lena nodded. That's how it should work. They sat without speaking until the mountains were gone into the dark and only their outlines remained against the stars. The morning Avery came to the door. October light was already on the upper ridgelines, low-angled and precise, casting the peaks into sharp relief against the sky so clear it seemed unreasonable. She heard his vehicle on the access road 20 minutes before it arrived. Sound carried in the valley the way it carried nowhere else she had ever lived. She was in the workshop when he knocked. He had changed in this 2 years since she had seen him, more settled. The person he had been becoming had finished becoming and arrived somewhere definite. He stood on her porch with his hands in his jacket pockets and the expression of someone who has rehearsed what they came to say and has decided the rehearsed version was inadequate. "Briggs said you'd want to hear this in person," he said. She waited. "There's a situation?" A pause. "It's been classified at a level that limits the available options significantly. The people working it have done everything they can with what they have." He looked at her directly. "Briggs said some problems have exactly one solution. And he said the solution should be the one deciding whether to be involved, not anyone else. Lena looked at him for a long moment. She looked at the mountains. The sun was moving across the upper ridgeline in the particular way it moved in October, when the angle was low enough that the light seemed to come from inside the stone rather than from anywhere in the sky. The valley below was still in shadow. A hawk was working the thermals above the meadow, the slow, patient circles of something that understood that waiting and watching were not the opposite of action, but the foundation of it. She had set the rifle down. She had meant it. But she had also always known in the part of herself she had learned over a lifetime to be honest with that setting. Something down was not the same as being finished with it. That some purposes did not end because the person carrying them decided to stop. That the silence she had built here in these mountains on this ridge was real and earned and hers, and was also simply the interval between one moment of necessity and the next. She had been ready. She had been ready the whole time. "Come inside," she said. "Tell me everything." She went to the workshop. She opened the case that had sat on the highest shelf, not hidden, not displayed, simply placed in the way of things too important for either. She laid each component out on the clean mat in the order she had established over 12 years of 1,000 repetitions. Her hands moved not from thought, but from the grain of who she was, who she had always been. Even in the years when no one was watching, even in the corner of an armory in Texas where the lights buzzed and the gun oil smell soaked into the walls, and a general who didn't know what he was looking at finally stopped and looked. Outside, the Bitterroot Mountains held their ground against the October sky, indifferent and permanent, and exactly as far away as they had always been. Somewhere beyond their ridgelines, at a distance that most people would say was impossible, something necessary was waiting. She would make it possible. She always had. That was the only thing about her that had never changed and would never change. Not the skill, not the record, not the badge, with its single line of engraved text that a general had once read 3 times trying to make the numbers mean something other than what they meant. Just the certainty, the absolute unbreakable certainty about who and why. The thing that made the distance mean something. The thing that had always in the end been enough.